It is always my pleasure when I get to be joined here on the program by Matt Verderame. He's a national NFL reporter for FANSIDED, covering all things free agency, I imagine. Davante Adams, the big storyline here, Matt, still almost 24 hours later. I know at first glance you tweeted that you said that this was something that both teams might regret. Why do you feel that way?
Well, look, Davante Adams is a great player. And I certainly think that he's worth a ton of money. That being said, if he was a quarterback, would almost be top 10 money as a quarterback. So when you're investing that kind of money in a receiver who most of that contract's going to play out during his 30s, it's a little bit of a risk. The other side of it is, too, I don't think the Raiders are one player away from winning the Super Bowl. They're not on the precipice. I would actually argue I still think they're the fourth best team in their own division. Now, that's no knock really on them in terms of their talent level. It's just that division is insane. Like, you are going against three teams in that division that have three of the top six quarterbacks in football. So it's a credit to the Raiders that they're trying to improve their team and they're being aggressive, and they've added Chandler Jones, they've added Davante Adams. That whole division might make the playoffs. Like, when you really look at the AFC, they really all might. I just think to give up your first and second round picks and then also pay Adams over $28 million a year into his 30s is a really risky move when the landscape of the AFC is such that they're not better than Kansas City. They're not better than Buffalo. I don't think they're better than the Ravens, Chargers, or Broncos. So maybe they prove me wrong, but I think that deal is fraught with danger for them. And for the Packers, you just signed Aaron Rodgers into his 40s. You're trying to win now. You're not trying to win in 5 years from now. So to me, I think without Adams, even though Rodgers is there and he's a back-to-back MVP, I just think they're limited in what they can do offensively.
I want to get into the Packers side of this because that whole side is fascinating to me. But so are you basically saying, before we move on, that it's because Derek Carr isn't necessarily the most talented quarterback, that's why you believe that the Raiders aren't, even the second or third best team in the division? Because I think, just to counter your point, a lot of people would look at what they've surrounded themselves with and say, hey, all right, Derek Carr's not a prolific quarterback, but he's not the worst quarterback. And now he's got weapons literally everywhere.
No, I think their offense is going to be very good. I think Carr, I would probably put Carr just outside the top 10. He's above average. Derek Carr is a good quarterback. And in a lot of divisions, Derek Carr would win a lot of division titles. He just has had the unfortunate circumstance of half his career has been with Peyton Manning and the other half has been with Patrick Mahomes. I worry more about them from the following standpoint. I do not think outside of Crosby and Jones they have a good defense. They are going to struggle to cover. They're going to struggle against the run. And in that division, if you can't cover, you have a major problem. So I think they struggle in that regard. And then also, they do have a first-year head coach in Josh McDaniels. Now, of course, he was a head coach way back when with Denver. That's going to take some time, I would think, and we'll see if McDaniels does a good job. It flamed out in Denver, but it was a decade ago. He was really young. Maybe he's a better head coach. I more look at it as, I think the Raiders, again, I think they might be a playoff team. Like, I really think that entire division might make the playoffs. Now, they might beat up on each other so much that maybe somebody falls out of it just from a mathematical standpoint. But I just think defensively, they have a lot of issues outside of Chandler Jones and Max Crosby. I don't trust the coach. And I look at those other three teams. The Chiefs speak for themselves. The Chargers have added a ton of talent and have Herbert. And the Broncos have added Russell Wilson. And that team was around a 500 team with Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater. So I honestly think the Raiders can win 10 games next year and be in last place in that division, which is more of a comment on the division and not so much them.
Yeah, I mean, only a couple of days, a week into the start of the 2022 NFL calendar year, and all of a sudden, like you said, the AFC West is completely bananas. I'm with you with the Chargers. I think that's a great-looking group. The Chiefs, I mean, walk me through kind of what they've done and what they've needed to do, because I haven't seen them add too much, and I think the knock on them at the end of last season was, hey, like, nobody's as scared of the Chiefs anymore.
It's true, and I mean, it's easy to walk it through because they didn't do anything. They added Justin Reed, Tyrann Mathieu. I'm assuming they're going to let walk. I mean, he's on the market still, but it doesn't seem they're bringing him back. Looks like Reed's his replacement. And I like the Justin Reed signing. I think the Chiefs are really short at edge rusher. They do not have an edge rush that scares you at all. They have Chris Jones inside, but Frank Clark does not scare anybody, despite the fact he's made 3 straight Pro Bowls. I wowl argue that Frank Clark should not have been a Pro Bowler in any of those years. And then at corner, they lose Charvarius Ward. They have a few decent corners. L'Jarius Sneed and Rashad Fenton are good. Sneed is above average. They need another corner. I think right now defensively they're below average. Offensively, they'll score points. They have a great offensive line. They have Hill, they have Kelsey, they have Mahomes. They'll figure that out. They'll score 30 a game. But I think if you're the Chiefs, you've had this gap between you and the rest of the division for a while now. The Chargers every once in a while will threaten, but they haven't been able to get over that hill. That gap is gone. Like, if I were picking the division tomorrow, I still think by and large, you'd have to say until somebody knocks them off, they're the team to beat. I mean, if you look at books in Vegas, they're the favorite. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Chargers found a way to win the division this year. I think Denver's a little bit further than the Chargers, but if Russell Wilson comes in and he plays great, like, they have a shot to do it. So I think the Chiefs for years have been the favorite, whereas now in the AFC, I think Buffalo's clearly better than Kansas City. I think Kansas City, to me, is still the team I would take outside of Buffalo, but there's an argument to be made, whereas in past years, I don't know that there really was a credible argument to be made.
Just going back to Aaron Rodgers and the Packers side of this whole Davante Adams thing, before we kind of take a look around at the rest of the league, how much does Jordan Love ultimately have to do with all the decisions that were made here? I mean, clearly Rodgers has been dictating what he wants and doesn't want, behind the scenes as a franchise guy over the last couple of months. This is a very curious decision to send Davante Adams packing when, like you said, they need to win right now. Is it also a case where you got a guy like Davante who's looking down the pipeline saying, like, is Jordan Love actually going to be the guy if I stay in Green Bay? And then Packers fans are wondering, like, why would we send that guy packing with Aaron Rodgers not having anybody left? I mean, how does, I guess, long story long, the end of the question here is, how has Aaron Rodgers ultimately shaped and determined what the next couple of years of the franchise is going to look like?
Well, when you take a contract the size that he took over the length of the deal, which is just a 4-year extension, it's really hard to spread out the cap hits. Like, everybody's pointing to, well, Mahomes took $450 million. Yeah, but it was over a 12-year contract extension. So they can move that money around and really spread out the hits. And eventually they'll probably just extend them again. And so you'll be just kind of pushing it down the line. With the Packers, there's going to be a year they're going to have to pay him $60 million against the cap. And when you have to do that, you have to make some really hard decisions. And I guess you could say to their credit, they've been able to keep a lot of that team together. Devondre Campbell came back. He had a great year, his first team All-Pro linebacker. I think a lot of people thought he was gone. They kept him 5 years, $50 million. They haven't had to really make a bunch of big cuts. They extended Preston Smith to lower his cap. They did cut Zadarius Smith, who was coming off the back injury. But with Adams, I don't know this for a fact, but I think if you read the tea leaves a little bit, it kind of looks like maybe he felt disrespected that they took so long to take care of him. And then also there's been all this talk about, hey, he wanted to go play with Derek Carr because they were teammates at Fresno State and they're really good friends. And that's fine and well. Look, I think if you're the Packers, there's been these stories kind of leaking out over the last 12 hours or so since the trade of, well, the Packers wanted to keep him. They would have matched, but in the end, he wanted to go. And it was like, okay, but he wasn't a free agent. Like, what are you talking about? This idea that, like, they had no other option is nonsense. Like, of course you had another option. You controlled his rights. You didn't have to trade him. And I got to tell you, if they offered that same contract on July 15th, the day of the tag deadline, you're going to tell me he's not taking that deal and he's playing out a 1-year tag? I don't think so. So I don't buy that for a second. I think the Packers felt like financially they had to do something. I think they could have gone some other avenues. Without him, you look at that offense and go, all right, no, well, now what? Because Valdez-Scantling's also a free agent. You have Alan Lazard, Robert Tonyan, the tight end, who's a good tight end. He's coming off torn ACL. I like their backs and Jones and Dillon, but that is an offense that there is not much. And if you look at the way they played in that playoff game against San Francisco, which certainly was not great, Aaron Rodgers sat there and targeted Adams religiously that entire game. Mm-hmm. Because he's the only one he trusts. Yeah. Like now you go into this season without him. I mean, that division's awful. They'll win the division. But you look at them and now, I don't know, are they a top 5 team in the league? It's debatable.
When you look around the league, outside of the situation with the AFC West, which is nuts, and Green Bay, I mean, what else do you kind of expect? What are you watching coming down the free agency pipeline? What other kind of landmines or explosive deals do you see us seeing? Are there teams that still really need to shore things up that are going to try to make a major move here? Or what are you kind of looking at now?
Well, I think the crux of free agency is obviously done. There are some really good players still out there. Tyrann Mathieu, who we talked about earlier, Teron Armstead at the Saints, the left tackle, who's still out there. There are some guys. Odell Beckham is still a free agent, although, of course, he's coming off the torn ACL. Juju Smith-Schuster's out there. Jarvis Landry's out there. So there are some names. But I think by and large, free agency is behind us. It's now more the second and third wave where you're going to maybe get some solid veterans. I think this is the time, actually, where teams get the best bargains. Because you see these huge contracts. A lot of these guys get cut in 2 years, right? And we've been talking a little bit about media now to a much lesser extent. But I think in this regard, the media fails the fans a lot of times when they report these contracts and it's 5 years and it's $100 million. When in reality, like the contract's really like 2 years and like $40 million, and it's just $60 million on the end. But they don't want to upset any of the agents, so they just tweet it out to make it look as big as it possibly could be. When in reality, they know it's like a 2 year, $40 million contract. So I think, that has been interesting to me this offseason. Like we saw Jacksonville just spend insane amounts of money, right? Like they went out and they signed Christian Kirk to something that was reported as $4 and $84, which I'm sure in reality he'll be there for 2 years if he doesn't perform well, and they'll move on with minimal damage. But I think now it becomes like Danielle Hunter of the Vikings. Could he be traded? I think we talked about them earlier. I think one team that might do something, because I think they kind of have to do something, is Kansas City. Like you can't sit here and watch this whole division get better. The Bengals are improving the offensive line. The Ravens have added some pieces. The Bills have added Von Miller. Like Justin Reed is a good player, but he's replacing a good player. So really, at best, you're staying status quo there, maybe even taking a half step down. You've done nothing. Now, you haven't lost a ton, but you haven't done anything. So I think if you're the Chiefs, like if I'm the Chiefs, if Danielle Hunter medically checks out, I'm all over Danielle Hunter. All over him. The guy's good for 15 sacks if he's healthy, right? He's 28 years old. So I think that's something to watch. But again, it's these quarterbacks. If Watson goes to the Falcons, Matt Ryan's going somewhere. They're not paying both of them. So then where does he go? Does he go to Indianapolis? Okay, if he goes to Indianapolis, then Baker Mayfield's not going to Indy. Is he going to Seattle? If he goes to Seattle, then okay, is Garoppolo now going to the Browns? And the interesting thing is, if that all plays out anywhere like that, and the Browns are the last team standing without a quarterback, you don't want to be the last team. Because the Niners can sit there and say, oh, great. Well, you have no other options. None. So you're going to pay us through the nose for Jimmy Garoppolo. Like it's all leverage game. It's all poker game. And it's interesting to see who gets stuck with the last chair.
Matt Verderame, you're the best. Love having you on the show. Great stuff, as always, on free agency and beyond. Hopefully we can talk to you in a couple of weeks once you, as you say, some of the other maybe more important sort of pieces fall into place and we start to really project who's going to be good and who's not as we look forward into 2022. Thanks for being with us.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.